Welcome. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
I'm Sylvia Earle. I'm a marine biologist and oceanographer, National Geographic explorer, founder of Mission Blue, and I'm an ocean elder. Thank you, ocean elders, for sponsoring this gathering.
Yes, and this is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community on topics of wonder and interest. We're glad to be back and hope that everyone has made some time to get outdoors. You can ask questions by putting them in the Q&A box, and later on in the program, we'll get through as many as we possibly can. And there will be some links in the chat as well for reference. As we get started, let's remind everyone that
The world is
blue. Today, we are so honored to be talking with Kristina Gjerde. Kristina is a graduate of the New York University School of Law. In 2003, she was awarded the Pew Fellowship in Marine Conservation to support work on the high seas governance reform. And in 2023, she received the IUCN World Commission on Protected Areas Fred Packard Award and in 2024, the Elizabeth Haub Award for Environmental Law and Diplomacy. And her efforts have been instrumental in the 2023 UN Agreement on Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreements.
Known as the BBJ.
BBJ. Well,
BBNJ.
NJ, yes. And so we're really grateful to have you here today, Kristina. That's going to be we'll really launch off and start talking about that. And I'm going to try to share your slides in just a second here.
But just to highlight an important event in my life, when Kristina and I shimmied into wetsuits.
As one does.
Wetsuits.
Oh, the worst.
And we were diving in Australia, but it was in an aquarium, not in the high seas. That is on my bucket list, Kristina, to go diving with you out there in the high seas, in the deep, deep blue. Let's make
that would be delightful.
In a submarine, maybe. How about that?
That would be wonderful.
That sounds fantastic. Yes. That's, as you will see, I love to be in and under and on top of the water. And yes, love your saying of the world is blue.
Yeah.
And I so respect your command of the rules and regulations, call that law, based in science, based in policies, based in habits, based in human behavior. But to actually use that discipline to get to a better place. One of the things that I hope that we can discuss here is that on our watch, during the last few decades, mine perhaps in particular, the world has changed enormously. And what, first of all, we might be able to do to the natural systems and kind of get away with it without seeing demonstrable harm. When there were fewer of us and when the ocean was more intact, before high seas fishing, before the threat of deep sea mining, before 90% of everything was shipped across the high seas to get to global markets, before plastics existed, let alone plastics that now invade every place on the planet, including the air and our own bodies, let alone the bodies of fish and whales and things, that you have consistently been tracking, again, the rule of law and how, although many of the laws that govern our lives and our behavior were made when the world was a different place, when there were more fish and fewer people, when some of the problems that now are really big problems, like these industrial fishing fleets that now did not exist 50 years ago when laws and habits and general expectations were formed. But here we are. we are where we are. And bravo to you for taking the framework of law and trying to get across the concept we have to use what we've got and make new laws as times change and as our needs.
Mm. Well, I was very fortunate. I had a very traditional legal career that was for 4 years working in maritime law, shipping law. And it was the trip to Palau that enabled me to see under the water for the first time. And that sort of helped to make me decide I'd much prefer to save the fish and the corals than the ships that were dumping oil and other pollutants into the sea. Liz,
Mhm.
you having a hard time pulling up my
I
photo?
am. It doesn't like to share it via the link that was
Or
sent.
maybe she could
Okay, shall I try to share my screen and
Yeah,
see
why
if
don't
I
you
can
give it a
figure this
shot?
out? Okay, and then I will go
Keeps
to,
pausing us.
I
see. Okay, that's now screen one.
There we
And
go.
okay, let me go.
Sweet.
Okay, well, okay, how's that?
Excellent. Adapt and overcome. It's always my favorite
Yes.
thing.
Okay, and as you will see, I also love high-tech tools. This is a photo of some colleagues actually diving in a coral reef down below 150 meters deep.
Yeah.
Coral reefs of the high seas were a question that Richard Pyle posed to Daniel Wagner and myself, and Daniel Wagner and Alani Willem and I sort of helped to form the Coral Reefs of the High Seas Coalition to, first of all, let's prove that there were actually kind of mesophotic coral reefs in the high seas, and now more focused on areas to protect them. I've been involved with lots of different organizations. Coral Reefs of the High Seas is one, but primarily with IUCN as Senior High Seas Advisor, but also co-founder of the High Seas Alliance, of the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, and the Sargasso Sea Alliance. So I'm not a serial entrepreneur, but I like to help facilitate the gathering of people to address global scale problems. And it's
just
been
half the world.
Yeah.
to be able to work with people like Sylvia Earle and you, Liz, and Jane Fonda, who was just at the BBNJ Preparatory Commission meeting. So it's a real treat for people who are better, more eloquent than I am to actually translate these thoughts that go through my brain into action. So I'm grateful to you all. This
Yeah.
is why Sylvia got confused as to, what are the acronyms of all this, because we're trying to summarize these many lines of text of agreement under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea on areas beyond national jurisdiction. We call it the BB&J agreement, sometimes the PB&J agreement, like bring
I
me
was
some
thinking. Yeah.
and jelly sandwiches. That really was something that we had to rely upon. Two important facts here is it's under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, so all the rules, rights, responsibilities of states continue on and are further elaborated in this so-called BB&J agreement. And what spurred my interest is that in 1995, 1992, 93, we had the Convention on Biological Diversity, which was there set to help conserve and sustainably use marine biological diversity, but they sort of left out 64% of the ocean.
Yeah.
They said, we will inspire cooperation, foster cooperation in areas beyond national jurisdiction, but its rules in many ways did not apply other than to processes and activities. And governments just said, we'll leave the high seas, deep sea alone for now. So I was 1 year, had a 1 year old at the time. Somebody asked me, well, look at the CBD convention. What does it actually do? And I said, oh, it does all these wonderful things, but this is what it doesn't do. That was the original inspiration back there. And as you will see from this slide, it has been sort of a long and eventful journey that was filled with many dates and wonderful occasions from Rio plus 20 and Rio de Janeiro. But what Liz mentioned about this 2003 Pew Fellowship that I was awarded is only slightly ironic because at the time I was awarded the fellowship to foster a new framework agreement under the Law of the Sea Convention in 3 years' time. To
Get on it.
yeah, to build that coalition, build the support, protect the ocean at the same time, and also get this framework agreement. Well, it took a little bit longer and a lot of more help from my friends and colleagues and a lot of wonderful scientists along the way. So no journey is a solo journey in the high seas world. But I'm happy to say in 2003, the agreement was finalized. It was adopted in 2003 in June. We had an organizational meeting at the United Nations in June of 2024, and I'm just back from New York where we had the first preparatory commission meeting where they're trying to lay out the institutional framework to bring this baby into life. I'll get into that a little bit later, but just wanted to give you a little bit of why I'm so relieved that the treaty is now adopted, and now we just need to wait for 60 nations to sign and ratify the treaty to bring it into force.
Wow, that's
And
amazing.
How many have so far?
It's been 21 nations have ratified, and 113, I do believe, have signed the treaty. And I have a slide to show sort of the distribution of states that have already signed the treaty. And it's really a delight to see that it's from north, south, east, west, small island states, and big countries. So it truly is globally distributed. I like this photo of the sort of jelly because it sort of illustrates that the BBNJ agreement is not a be-all agreement. It doesn't solve all of our problems, but it does help to set high-level objectives to provide an arena, this little golden crown, for states to come together, NGOs, civil society, scientists, indigenous peoples, to really try to address all the problems that are facing our shared ocean.
I really like that they've included some of the indigenous voices as well. You know, we just on our last episode we had Hinano and Frank Murphy talked about all the indigenous connections to the deep sea and to the high seas in Polynesian culture, and how important it is ancestrally for them and part of their whole story line, their origin stories.
Yeah.
So it's so important to have them included in this discussion.
Indeed, indeed. We've been privileged to have Uncle Saul
Oh yeah.
join us from the Native Hawaiian elder that's in both the BBNJ and the International Seabed Authority meetings to inform all the delegates who haven't heard the story before about the Kualipo, about the origin of life and Hawaiian peoples, humans, from these tiny coral polyps in the deep ocean. And I would say this aspect of indigenous knowledge has really enriched my appreciation of the ocean from bottom to top.
Ours too.
I was really pleased to see the episode that aired last with Frank and Hinano. So yeah, the ocean is vast, but the high seas, the areas beyond the exclusive economic zone, sort of approximately 200 nautical miles from coastal zones, comprises nearly 64% of the ocean. And as some of us would argue, since the ocean is average 3,800 meters deep, 95% of the livable habitat for life on this planet.
Including poles.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And as we all know, whales, sharks, manta rays don't recognize national boundaries. They don't need a visa. They just cross them back and forth. And this map from the Census of Marine Life was really more of a visualization to show some of the early technologies for tagging and tracking sea turtles and sharks and seabirds as they swam or flew or were swept away in the ocean currents from California to Japan and maybe hopefully back from the Arctic to the Antarctic. This was the Census of Marine Life was a 10-year initiative from 2000 to 2010 that coincided wonderfully with Sylvia's wish that everyone do everything they can to help build a network of marine protected areas across the ocean, including the high seas. And so we actually got the permission from the Census of Marine Life team to provide a lot of the scientific input that originally went into trying to develop the ecologically and biologically significant areas that the CBD then endorsed, and to help build that scientific basis for establishing what are now the first tier of future high seas MPAs.
And that included kind of a biggish hope spot called the Sargasso Sea. Huh.
Yes, indeed.
I remember that whole initiative of the Sargasso Sea, and it'd be really interesting to see what it would take to create sort of a high seas hope spot.
For all of it.
All of it.
Yeah.
All of it. Yes, indeed. It's one giant hope spot with a little bit of management and zoning in between, or however.
Yeah, but
the idea of the hope spot is that it's not officially locked into law, but it's a journey. It's a place that people can get behind. They see why it matters and then do whatever they can to move toward as the highest level for the largest area of protection possible, because we need to secure the planet, the safety for ourselves and life as we know it, currently at risk because we aren't taking care of the high seas or the rest of the planet either in ways that will give us a secure future.
well, there's the whole 30% by 2030 initiative. Does any of that really include the ocean?
Oh yeah.
Yes,
But
most definitely.
how much is,
How much of the 30
yeah, how close to 30% are we?
of the high
Ah, I think it's sort of like less than 1% still of the high
Oh my
seas
God.
qualify. That was, but can you see my
5 years.
cursor on here? Or
Yeah,
which screen are you seeing? This one or this one?
yeah, we see your,
Now?
I'm sorry.
oh yes, there it is. Yep, we see your cursor.
Okay, okay. So this is the area for those who aren't familiar with the hope spot of the Sargasso Sea. This is the area where the sea turtles and the eels congregate. The eels come here to spawn and then go west to the United States and Canada and east to Europe and Africa. And it's just sort of a wonderful symbol of how the high seas really unites us in so many ways. And that's this is really one of the places that we would like to get going with the scientific evidence base that we have now. Uh, yes, and it's been frustrating because it's been around. The Sargasso Sea Alliance has been around since 2008, when we had those first meetings with Sylvia in Bermuda. But there is hope, there is progress, and the international institutions are finally coming together.
That's
But
encouraging.
yeah. Oh, what I wanted to show here is this is a tidied up graphic of all the institutions that have some competence in areas beyond national jurisdiction, and why initially everybody was so afraid of this BBNJ agreement coming into their turf. That was, how are you going to affect international shipping? We rule the waves. What about seabed mining? What about fishing? Marine biodiversity? Oh, we've got lots. We cover migratory species. We cover trade in endangered species and ocean science. But of course, the challenge is that none of these really have biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction as their central focus, at least in terms of the conservation. But all of them have the ability to undermine or detract or to add, some little component, but not the holistic integrated approach we now know we need. What's exciting about the BBNJ agreement is, just to foreshadow myself, is that it has obligations for the states parties to both cooperate through the BBNJ agreement to act independently, but also to take the obligations of the BBNJ agreement into these different bodies in order to advance the objectives of the agreement. So even though the BBNJ agreement does not have the power to tell the IMO what to do, it does have the power to influence both ways in terms of its own decision making, but also its ability to then influence the members of the International Maritime Organization to inform them. This is what's important. We need to coalesce and agree on going forward here. So it's, oh, go ahead.
It looks as though there's a lot going on out in the global commons known as the high seas, with rules and regulations, national and international jurisdictions carving up the high seas. And yet, isn't it true that it's still pretty much the Wild West? That there's a lot of illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, but there's also a lot of legal fishing that is benefiting a small number of countries, but is taking from the global commons, that it still is represented, at least the way the law generally is perceived. If it belongs to anybody, it belongs to everyone. And yet a few are disproportionately moving into the high seas, extracting as if it's free goods. They're just without a price tag on it. You just go out and take it. And if you look at this, it looks as though everything's kind of buttoned up.
Yeah, well, this is the challenge even for the BBNJ agreement. Once you have the law in place, it doesn't mean that it's well implemented.
Right.
And so, fishing is theoretically regulated. There are still a few gaps where there is no regional fisheries management organization, but more right now is the challenge of bringing science and equity into the world of the regional fisheries management organizations. They've sort of been able to manage on their own and mainly at the behest of the members of the organizations, which are by treaty definition only those with an economic interest in the fishery. And what's exciting about the BB&J agreement is it allows all those with an interest in biodiversity, including from its traditional indigenous knowledge, aspects, and values, to participate in the meetings, the decision, well, not quite the decision makings, but to participate as entities and to be respected as entities. And it's hopeful that the sort of new influx of sort of participation and inclusiveness will then translate into these other bodies. Because yes, I agree there could many of these bodies would benefit from a huge shift in the level of transparency. But we've seen a new world just in the past 6 months at the International Seabed Authority, when you
Yeah.
change the Secretary General, and the new Secretary General is able to institute sort of a whole new regime of transparency, of welcoming statements and even petitions, a 30-meter long petition from Greenpeace that was
Wow.
delivered to the new Secretary General. And she said, "Oh, this is great. I'll put it in our museum." So,
Well,
But Kristina, part of this is all based on traditional ways of measuring value for the ocean. Dead fish have a price tag. Live fish, unless you can sell it, is a worthless. Trash fish, it's bycatch, but it's life. And valuing the living ocean, valuing biodiversity, not just what you can take and kill and market, but what you value because it's alive, whether it's, you can put another price tag on it in terms of carbon value for whales or tuna or krill or any living thing for that matter. But one of the shifts that the indigenous voices are bringing is, okay, you guys, you want your fish dead. You want to take them to, or squid
squid, yeah.
or krill,
mhm.
and you only see the value of what you can extract from the ocean dead. We bring the value of the living ocean. We want our fish alive. Why are our voices not as respected as those you just want to kill? We want to care. We have values. We respect. We treat the deep sea. Many of the cultures that are ocean cultures, ocean oriented, the Polynesians, for example, but not just them, but around the world, people who value the ocean as a sacred place. And it's totally been neglected in the law. It's been just in terms of the marketplace. And it's how humans have developed a relationship with nature. taking nature to market. And if we can't eat it or sell it or put it to some quotes use, it's not considered as anything worth protecting or valuing and whatever. So here we are at this juncture where the old values are still very much in place in the law. And that's what you are dealing with and trying to really and succeeding in having these other voices, other values represented on something like an equal footing, which is hard when you're so ingrained that the only reason that we want to protect tuna is so we can kill more tuna.
Right.
Mm. Yes, we did get the concept, well, not we, but the states, led by the Pacific Small Island Developing States, the concept of stewardship
Mhm.
into the treaty that was, and recognizing the value of biodiversity, the intrinsic and inherent value of biodiversity and its importance for present and future generations. That was, we worked to try to translate the concepts of stewardship and custodianship and guardianship into language that could be put into the treaty's principles. It didn't get into the principles, but at least it got into the preambular text, the stuff that comes up on top that's supposed to inform sort of the approaches of governments to implementation. That's, as a first step. There's something called the rights of nature for the ocean movement that many have been involved in, that provide a better understanding of how we can create better feelings of respect, reciprocity, and responsibility for the health of the ocean, the Mother Ocean. And I think as we get more and more examples being adopted in terrestrial in terrestrial areas as well as in exclusive economic zones, we can start to pull on some of those examples and perhaps do things like recognizing the personhood of whales and their right to free transit, unimpeded transit across the oceans. There's some very exciting movements going on.
Well, Kristina, again, there's evidence that we can change. That little bump there at the bottom with IWC, the International Whaling Commission. I served on that commission for 4 years during a time when whales were only valued in terms of barrels of meat and oil and pounds of tons of meat. And they're not even as individuals, even though the economic value of whales already back in the 1980s of whale watching was exceeding the value of what whales could be sold for in the marketplace. And now the carbon value of whales is another measure, but if it works for whales, it works for tuna, works for krill, works for squid, that this is part of the climate issue as we chew away and diminish the actual amount of life in the ocean. It has carbon, climate consequences, plus the biodiversity that is even more clear cut. But there are more whales today since we stopped killing them for the most part in 1986 with international agreement. So it's cause for hope that we can get our act together across, the often the recognition that the Antarctic Treaty came into agreement for the land at the height of the Cold War. I mean, we were not really making peace across the planet on many fronts, but on that, even Russia and the United States agreed.
So what is kind of preventing something similar from happening for the high seas, since they
Yeah,
are kind of that global common?
Put that question to Kristina.
Oh, I am. I mean, we have that example of Antarctica where for many, many years it's been considered sort of this, very cooperative, but protecting the land part. But even just getting the ocean around Antarctica,
The high seas around
the high seas around Antarctica is fraught with difficulty, and then but it was that vision that it belonged to everyone, right? And why
disproportionately being plundered
by a few.
Yes.
by a few.
Well, Antarctica and the Southern Ocean are sort of wonderful historical examples of what we can do, and then the limits to what we can do collectively. That was the Antarctic Treaty from 1959, was just sort of the first disarmament treaty, really, saying that we're not going to allow this to become a new place of weaponization. And it's going to be a place of peace and cooperation. That's very noble ambitions. When CAMLAR, the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Living Marine Resources, was established, the fish, it was almost like too late to the game. Some of the key species had already been overfished. And again, it was promoted largely by those states with a stake in the fishing industry, with the grand exception that it also included those with scientific interest in what was going on there. So CAMLAR was able to sort of overcome its mainly extractive focus to embrace much broader issues of conservation and looking at the krill and the balance of the ecosystem. But it had a fatal flaw. It required consensus to take every single decision. And because of that consensus requirement that no state object, that was a few states, China and Russia, have been able to block progress on developing a system of marine protected areas down in the Southern Ocean. And those of us involved in the high seas BBNJ agreement negotiations and states were very cognizant of that frustration down in the Southern Ocean and made sure that there is an active outlet for voting if consensus cannot be achieved. Consensus brings practically miracles, as with the Antarctic Treaty, that was governments did agree to lay down their arms and to make it a place of scientific basis and to help one another. But when you always demand consensus, then you are plagued by just moving by the slowest player.
Yeah, I guess in the Antarctic situation, ordinary consumers can really help because you just take krill oil or any of the fish that
Eating
are
salmon.
well, yeah,
Farm
farm
Mhm.
salmon. You can connect the dots to go back to things that are extracted from the Antarctic Ocean and make these conscious efforts to eliminate them from
eliminate the market.
eliminate the market.
Yes, I mean, what happened with Antarctic? What are the big ugly fish?
The toothfish or the
Toothfish, yes, the
yeah.
Coalition for Illegal Toothfish was actually an industry-led initiative to sort of say we only want to be landing legally caught toothfish at sustainable levels. I mean, it was in response to the rising levels of illegal fishing
Mhm.
that was in Antarctica for these incredibly long-lived species that are basically keystone species. For the longest time, you would not see Patagonia toothfish or Antarctic toothfish in the markets. That was because the NGO,
Chilean sea bass.
Yeah,
Chilean sea bass, yes,
yeah,
indeed.
yeah, they
Uh,
market just because
yeah,
it's one of the hazards of consuming
Names.
consuming ocean wildlife at all is the whole marketing and renaming, rebranding, and just kind of
yes.
disguising what you really are consuming. Um,
But
but it's an
uh,
important step to
yeah,
take. It's something they can do and kind of help because it's no joke. It takes a lot of fuel and cost to get a vessel all the way down to Antarctica from Norway or from
to
wherever
Antarctica.
to Antarctica.
Mm.
It's a lot of expense.
And a lot of CO2 and other emissions into the atmosphere.
Yes, I mean, it's a similar case with orange roughy that
Hmm.
was, fished deep on seamounts before scientists even realized that they spawned only once they reached age 35, or that they could live to be 240 years old. They'd be as old as Napoleon.
Yeah,
That was,
wild.
and they had renamed the fish originally called slimehead into orange roughy to make it more marketable.
Yeah.
But it still didn't prevent market-based mechanisms as well as the United Nations General Assembly from saying, hey, wait a minute, we need to assess, we need to understand, we need to prevent significant adverse impacts. So combination of public and civil society pressure can do a lot to change the paradigm under which many of these activities are conducted. I mean, unfortunately, we haven't quite been able to create that sea change that Sylvia's hoping on. We're all hoping on the way RFMOs manage their activities. But there's been small movement and movement in other areas.
We really need a shift in values because, as you pointed out, at Camelar, those who have a vested economic interest are favored. Their voices are given priority. What about those, maybe it's most of the world, if you think about it, we have a vested interest too. These systems add to maintaining the integrity of the planet. They're important for their own sake. They're more alive, and yet, how can dead krill be worth more than live krill? Doing their role, and by protecting the animals on the land, but not protecting the systems that keep them alive and also keep us alive. We need to be serious about honoring whose interests are at stake here. Yours, mine, everyone, against a smaller group of those who make money and are not paying the real cost, because how do you buy a 100-year-old fish like the deep sea fish, like orange roughy or a Chilean sea bass? They live longer than humans. Wouldn't you like to know their secrets? I mean, isn't that of some value?
It sounds like a good book. Our National Geographic cover story, The Secrets of Orange Roughy.
But it does tie back also to this, the whole question of the deep seabed mining, and the impacts that will have on the ocean writ large, and for a very minor benefit, if any benefit, given that the metals, I think,
That's in another one of these little boxes, ISA.
the ISA, but the metals, there's only like two metals that are found in those living bacterial coated nodules that have any significance to batteries. And battery companies are already like, we don't need to do this. We're coming up with other chemistries that are better, cheaper, more recyclable.
Not dependent on unobtainium.
Unobtainium, yeah.
Yeah.
How does that all slot in with this? I've even seen where some of the fishing interests are saying, "Oh, we don't want deep sea mining because it's gonna destroy the whole fishing industry." So
it is a huge concern, deep sea mining, and there has been progressively at the International Seabed Authority and within sort of the global community, increasing concern and calls for a precautionary pause or a moratorium on deep seabed mining. There's now at least 30 states who have sort of vocally come out and said, no, now is not the time. I mean, many do view it as a threat to the integrity of ocean ecosystems, as well as to the health of the tuna species that many in the Pacific Islands may depend upon for their local food, as well as the larger markets. It's been exciting to see, but this is, again, a product of both governance change. That was with the election of the new Secretary General, who is definitely much more neutral and not having a seeming agenda for promoting rapid opening up of the seafloor for exploitation.
right.
We have a similar problem right now in the United States, where there's some people at the top who are being approached by wannabe deep seabed miners who have been frustrated by the slow pace at the International Seabed Authority, where they're now saying, we need to know more about what the impacts are going to be and whether we actually need these. So now they've turned their attention to the United States and are trying to get their permit to actually recover metals expedited. That was through emergency measures, because clearly we're running out of stocks of minerals, as you just said. The two that you need for batteries were not. that was, and the technology is going to go more rapidly. So it's all like a game of snakes and ladders, really.
Yeah, and the United States isn't even um, uh, party to the Law of the Sea Treaty, right?
Haven't ratified
Haven't
it.
ratified it.
How much time do you have to talk about this?
Yeah, a lot of time, but we have, but that's kind of a whole. Isn't that the whole way that the sort of the mining companies are able to sort of snake around and try to get these measures in place to allow them to work outside the law,
Outside of international law.
outside of international law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we shall see. The Law of the Sea Convention, in many ways, is overly detailed when it comes to seabed mining, but it also says that no state, not just a state party, shall mine outside the regime laid forth in the international seabed by the International Seabed Authority. It
Hmm.
also says that no state that is trying to mine outside the International Seabed Authority regime can actually sell its minerals to other states. That's so that the minerals that a U.S. subsidiary, that the metals company would want to get in the International Seabed Authority could basically be prohibited from being landed anywhere that's not the United States. You could take it to the extreme of it shouldn't be mixed with other metals,
Right.
and you could actually require some form of traceability to say, where is this mineral coming from? Where have these been processed? And then actually say, well, no, we are bound under the Law of the Sea Convention, theoretically, arguably, to not allow these products to enter our country. Now,
That's
so at the International Seabed Authority in March, when the metals company introduced its idea of saying, well, we're going to go around via the United States, there was a tremendous outcry opposed to this. And it really helped to galvanize this feeling of it's us, of sort of the community interest that people said we need to go through the International Seabed Authority. We need to do things in the common interest of humanity, which is what's so exciting about the Law of the Sea. This actually dedicates an institution to operating on behalf of humankind as a whole, to inspire participation, to advance scientific knowledge, and to really make sure that any benefits from activities in the area are shared. And that mission has been sort of dampened down in the interest of accelerating access to these seabed minerals in the International Seabed Authority. But now, when somebody's saying they're going to go outside, all of a sudden, I think much greater interest in, well, the rule of law. I mean, this is what keeps global peace to the extent it does. This is what keeps global markets operating. This is what keeps information and goods flowing.
Yeah.
But what is changing is recognition that the world is changing. That, I mean, the natural world, those conditions that make it possible for us to live on this little blue speck, that we are putting ourselves at risk the more we chew away at those critically important natural systems that make Earth unique in the universe. I love these guys who want to go to Mars, and I say, great, go.
Bye-bye.
But Earth is in a serious era of unprecedented. We talk about changing temperature and changing chemistry. Those two, the loss of the fabric of life, we need all those bits and pieces. We may not know by our value sense what every little insect is worth or every little kind of creature in the sea, but they're there. They've been there long before there were humans. They are the ones responsible for shaping rocks and water over billions of years into a planet that is just right for us and life as we know it. And in a remarkably short period of time, we've been chopping down the trees and extracting life out of the ocean, altering the chemistry, altering the temperature, making it increasingly likely that Earth is not going to be habitable for us unless, like the Lorax, unless people like you and me and everyone listening and all the people in the world face up to the reality that we have to take care of nature. Nature takes care of us, and we have really been complacent. Maybe ignorant is too strong a word, but we've been taking nature for granted.
Mm-hmm. On the taking nature for granted, there was just a study out that showed that the ocean biological pump is worth, just in terms of its carbon sequestration, over $1 trillion a year.
Wow.
This was a first effort to try to calculate what is the biological pump actually doing in terms of sequestration of carbon. And it's just a small example of how science can help us to start value some of these ecosystem services, but even it falls short of translating the values that you're talking about, Sylvia, of just life itself and what
Yeah.
it contributes to our aesthetic and spiritual and cultural.
It kind of kills me when I hear people say, oh, so many people are dependent on the ocean for their livelihoods. Well, 100% of people are dependent on the ocean for their life.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that concerns me now are proposals for marine carbon dioxide removal into the ocean.
That.
That was,
I know, like mind blown, So,
yes. And I got involved in that issue back in 2007 and was sort of like looking, okay, as you said, law is law, but it's also a tool to address problems at hand. Or if it's not sufficient, then you need to create new law. And we looked at the London Convention and London Protocol, and read some obscure text that talked about placement of waste or other matter were excluded from the coverage of the London Convention, other than when it's contrary to the aims of the London Convention, which is prevention of pollution and prevention of harm to the marine environment. So we were able to get it on the agenda of the London Convention and London Protocol, where they sort of said, we need a moratorium on this, but we'll write out some provisions to at least require assessment of marine scientific research. Well, the assessment requirements under the London Protocol are not yet in force, but it doesn't mean that they're not international standards. But now they're being roundly ignored. All these marine carbon dioxide removal proposals are not assessing what the impacts are not ensuring that they're not driven by commercial interests, or the sale of carbon credits. And that's exactly what these London Protocol assessment framework was trying to avoid. And
right.
so now we have resulted in a void of international governance for the huge number of proposals for different types of ocean marine carbon dioxide removal, whether it's ocean alkalinity enhancement or dumping iron into the ocean to stimulate phytoplankton. You could probably talk more about the science, but people say, well, phytoplankton is the basis of life. You're going to change the communities upon which we depend.
Well, and that's the other one of just like growing macroalgae and then sinking it into the deep
Yeah.
sea. And I was kind of like, what has ever prepared the environment in the deep sea to have sort of giant macroalgae falling down on it? It's just kind of wild.
Yes. So I will start to talk about in terms of the BBNJ agreement, the things that it does do is one, oblige the states to cooperate and to carry its objectives of basically an equitable and healthy ocean into these other bodies. It's also about the equitable aspects of sharing benefits and marine genetic resources, capacity building, technology transfer, but also environmental impact assessments.
Yes.
That was, and we did fight long and hard to have these environmental impact assessment requirements apply to activities generated within national boundaries that could affect areas beyond national jurisdiction. Unfortunately, we lost on that one. The treaty only specifically applies to activities that are authorized to take place on the high seas. It does have voluntary commitments to sort of say, well, we could apply the provisions of the BBNJ agreement if we want to. That was so, yeah, you've got the London convention and protocol, which sort of say we need to cover these things, but have not made very much progress. We've got the BBNJ agreement, which says we need to address things that could cause significant adverse impacts in the marine environment, but one, is not yet enforced, but two, it doesn't apply to where the focus of these activities may be. And if they're actually scaled up beyond a research, they will have global, they're designed to have large scale impacts. And then there's area-based management tools, our marine protected areas that, we're really hoping that will become these oases of protection. But you can't have long sort of sustainable oases if you're undermining the health of the ocean around. So all of these things have to live together as part of the package. You need all states capable of participating knowingly and with access to the technologies, as well as research and knowledge. If we're going to be managing our global ocean commons into the future.
Yeah, the ocean health piece and sort of monitoring what the heck people are doing, because it's the ultimate out of sight, out of mind environment below the surface. People can do a lot of terrible things, abandon gear, dump things, and it's largely goes unnoticed. So it's a good thing that you've got some assessment requirements in there.
So yeah, what's the ocean ever done for me?
That's right.
Why
should I care? Yeah.
That was so what I was referring to earlier was just coming back from this what some may call dull and procedural meeting, where they're talking about bringing the treaty into force. What are the institutions, and what are the rules of procedure for actually making the treaty operational? So they actually do have all these different bodies in the text of the agreement that need rules of procedure. They need members, they need criteria for members, they need money, they need access to money, and they actually need the operationalization going forward. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. But this was, sort of like trying to divide in this paper that we did back in 2022, sort of saying, okay, the treaty is near the finish line. What do we need to do to actually get it over and beyond? So building up the institutional mechanisms is actually absolutely critical. We also need to get the treaty into force, and we need to develop the science capacity. And this is the map that I was looking at before, which sort of shows in green the states that have ratified, and there's too many small island states, but Belize, Palau, Mauritius, Seychelles are all amongst, and Cuba are amongst the first to actually have ratified the agreement. All these in orange are ones who have signed the BBNJ agreement. So to me, it sort of symbolizes this is not just a instrument of the global north trying to impose new rules, but it's a mutually beneficial arrangement where we recognize the need to manage collaboratively this vast global commons, and we need to be able to share the capacity in order to do so. So there's hope, and there's signatories 113. So I think I was correct there. So this is sort of a picture of what the UN looks like from the back of the room where the NGOs get to sit. You definitely need binoculars, I think, to see what's going on in the front of the room. They do have these cameras, but IUCN, High Seas Alliance, and many other institutions were there. And I just thought this was a nice summary that countries actually came prepared. This was a complex meeting that was with many options to pick from in terms of the rules of procedure and the institutions. But it really showed that there is still a collaborative spirit for advancing this treaty and for advancing the hope, really, that it holds in the multilateral treaty system, in the multilateral system as a whole, that there are still places where nations can come to collaborate. Eleanor Hammarskjöld who I don't know if she's related to Dag Hammarskjöld, the former Secretary General of the United Nations. I hope so. But she came and sort of blessed the reception that the High Seas Alliance and IUCN and others held the first night of the treaty, and said, this really is a pillar of the international multilateral system. And it is our hope going into the future. So we need to build.
Kristina, there's one other thought. One of the big thoughts for more than 50 years, I've been hearing from time to time in a conference that we were both involved with called Defying Ocean's End that took place in Baja, California in, I guess it was 2003.
Yeah.
That where nations, a number of nations came together, and NGOs and 50 people in all, just to deliberate on what are the problems facing the future of the ocean, the future of humankind, and what can be done about it. And one of the key takeaways was endorsement for the idea that the high seas, roughly half the world beyond national jurisdiction, should be a global ocean trust, an international place where there is peace, much like Antarctica, where no extractive industries would take place. Of course, there would be ship traffic on the surface. There would be guidelines that people would respect otherwise, but you leave top to bottom as the core, like the blue heart of the planet would be the high seas. That everybody uses it. We value it because we're alive. It's our life support system.
Blue heart.
Yeah, I mean the deepest
circulatory system.
heart of
Yes.
It's the deepest, and also respecting that the deeper we go, the less we know, and the more new things we're finding. This is the precautionary principle, another idea that was wholeheartedly endorsed, not just by those present at this conference, this international conference back in 2003, but I hear that time and time again. We don't know everything that we need to know, so why would we even think, why would we presume that we know enough to go tear across the deep sea, for example, and we don't know what's there that it could be, not only that could be more valuable in monetary terms, like the library of life, for example, but disrupting the systems that make Earth habitable. We're just like little kids running around
Sticking a knife in the electric.
Yes. Well, I should say we've just or the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition has just published a report that I was part of, which is on the International Seabed Authority 2.0, and you mentioned the library. This is sort of trying to revision the International Seabed Authority and how it would look under the conditions of a precautionary pause on seabed mining, and truly allow the global community to come forward on international collaborative research that was both to investigate the processes that support life on Earth, but also to better understand and value why it's keeping us alive on this Earth, and also to explore potential genetic codes that may inform new cancer drugs or new industrial processes or new cosmetics, to keep our face looking young. There's so much to be gained from an intact ocean. So we are closer to achieving that sort of world public trust for the deep ocean, I would say right now, than we've ever been before, just by continuing to keep this vision from 2003. I would say a large part of that vision is also on accountability, that governments are responsible to their citizens and to the citizenry of our ocean planet for the decisions they take. And if we can continue to promote new forms of accountability of the decisions that are being made in, some of the regional fisheries management organizations, in the other institutions, I think you can start to lift the eyes and the heart up to seeing a better future.
I think so too. And
Knowing that our constituency includes those who aren't born yet,
it's true.
Yes, indeed.
the decisions we make now are forever kinds of decisions. You can't go back once you've undertaken continuing industrial fishing at the current or increased level that some are aiming for, and certainly deep sea mining. We know enough to know how dangerous it is to the future.
And how absolutely foolish it is economically. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just,
that too.
it makes no sense.
Yes, and we certainly don't want to start new activities like fishing in the mesopelagic of the
No.
ocean. That was for a
Terrible.
time of fish to create new forms of fish meal.
Fish meal, just insanity.
Well,
That's
we've already invested literally trillions of dollars in exploiting the ocean. Period.
and now we need even just a part of that to help to restore it.
Yeah.
Into caring.
Well, we are creeping past the top of the hour. And what I want to say is that there's got to be a lot of young lawyers out there, and they need to go talk to you. You need to get them on track.
I like talking to the
ambulances.
scientists too, to
Yep,
bring them into
chasing
the
ambulances, no injury attorneys. Get on to helping you in your efforts in protecting the high seas and
Injury to the ocean.
life. Yeah, injury to injury. Let's get an injury attorney, injury to the ocean, injury to life on Earth. Let's go for that.
Thank you, Kristina.
Sounds
You're
great.
such a star.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to join you. Thank you to Sylvia for your years. You make my 20+ years pale of dedication and support and creative vision. And to Liz, thank you for convening all of us together, and the Ocean Elders for being a pillar of support.
They really are. And thank you to everyone else in the diving community that keeps showing up for our conversations and participating in making change. We are grateful to you all, and water connects us all. We're going to be back again on May 27th, schedule permitting.
No, it'll happen.
And until then, remain curious and remember, take care of the ocean.
Take care of the ocean as if your life depends on it, because
It does.
it does.
It
yeah.
does. Thank you again, Kristina. Take good care.
Thank you so much.
Bye for now, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.